Greetings. Welcome to our ongoing analysis and discussion about the question of socialism versus capitalism. In this, this is part 3. What we're going to discuss right now is some people's firsthand observations about what people who actually lived under socialism have to say about it. And one thing I've noticed here in America is that a lot of people, I'd even venture to say most of the people that support and are proponents for socialism don't really have any experience living under it or making any type of observations about the people who live there. Now, one thing that I've noticed just in general from my observations about things is that when you look at people that are running away from one country to go to another one, I mean, people that just pack up and leave, they sail, it's like they actually risk their lives to get out of one country to go to another one. Just about in all the instances of that I've seen, it's virtually always people trying to leave some type of socialist, totalitarian type of state to get somewhere where it's more free, like people coming to America or people, that type of thing. But you really don't see people leaving most capitalist countries to get to a socialist country. I've never seen that one. Or if you think of Berlin, they had Berlin, the people, they had put up a wall because so many people were trying to leave East Berlin to get to West Berlin, I believe it was. I can't remember which way it was going. But what I do know is that all the people in the socialist part of the country were the ones trying to get over to the more capitalist or more free portion of the country. You didn't have people going the other way. It was just a one-way thing pretty much. So much so that they were regularly, literally shooting people that would try to escape the socialist regime or the communist regime. So if it's so good, why are people willing to actually literally risk their lives to escape it? But this doesn't seem to register with people who adhere to the socialist, doctrine. So with that said, what I'm going to do here, this is the second portion of the article we were talking about before, where we talked about how socialism and communism had a lot in common with actual slavery. They're very similar in the effects, even though the ideology may sound a little bit different or even a lot different. But in a practical application, there's not that much difference between slavery, socialism, and communism. When you strip away all the flowery words and concepts and ideas, practically speaking, socialism and communism are pretty much slavery. Whether you want to believe it or not, you can refer back to the previous discussion that we had in part 2 about this. So with all that said, I'm going to go through this guy's experiences with him talking to people that actually lived under socialism. And the first experience here is dealing with Swedish socialism. And so the author, he used to work for a Fortune 500 company who had a lot of divisions around the world. And so at one particular time, he found himself in Sweden. And he was having a business dinner with one of the vice presidents of that division, I suppose. And what he noticed is that even though this guy made more money than him, he lived in a pretty modest life in a Stockholm apartment. He didn't own a car, and he just rented his apartment. He didn't own his home. So at one point while they were talking, the VP asked him, well, how much do you pay in taxes? And he said, in the author, he said he had to stop for a minute. He had to think about it. And he calculated that he paid between 25 to 30% in taxes. And so this Swedish VP was like, what? That's nothing. He actually said that he paid between 70 and 75% of his income in Swedish taxes. And the author says that he was totally stunned at this, and that he asked him, he was like, well, wait a minute, what do you get for paying all these taxes? And so the answer was that he had cradle to grave health care. Doesn't have to pay for any doctor's visits. He gets a month of paid vacation every year. He has state subsidized transportation, a military to protect the country, subsidized corporations, and strong unions. So the author, got to thinking about it, and then he, in his reply to this Swedish vice president, he says, look, hey, I own my home. I got 2 cars. I can take my family on nice vacation. I have nice vacations as well. I have health care insurance plan through the company. My country, the United States, has the strongest military in the world by far, which he didn't add. And that he also has money left over to buy the things that he wants or needs. And he said at the end of the evening, this Swedish guy told him, he said, hey man, he said, you Americans, you got it made. And that was this socialist interpretation of what he just heard the author talk about. So the author speaks about another incident that he had where he spoke with some people who were in the Soviet Union under what we call Soviet communism, even though technically speaking it's not communism, because communism is really an ideal. So I guess more properly or more accurately you could describe it as socialism. So he, at one of his seminars, he got to talking to these people that lived in the Soviet Union. And so they got to talking. And so the author says that the one conversation that they had that really stood out to him the most was about the housing situation for this couple. And both him and his wife, they lived in a large city, in the outskirts of a large city. And his daily commute was about an hour a day. An hour each day, each way. So that's an hour going to work and an hour coming home from work. So he decides, well, this sucks. I'm ready to move closer to my job. So he wanted to move to the other side of the city. But since he lived in government housing, and since in socialism, the government handles all the housing, they own all the property. So if you want to move, you just don't, it's not like we do here in the United States when we say, well, hey, I'll find an ad, or I'll go to the place, I'll find the owner, see if he's got some vacancy, or you can look around and find a place you want to move to, and then, pay the down payment. You know how it goes. But since he's in a socialist country, he has to in his government housing, he had to apply to the government to request to move. So this guy, he says he fills out the forms and submits them. Then he says nothing happened for a while. So he starts asking around, well, what's going on with my request? Because he wasn't hearing anything, and you sitting there, and meanwhile this guy is going 2 hours a day just to get to work and back home. So he didn't hear anything. So then he was told that it would help if he bribed some of the officials to help. So he goes ahead, he bribes the officials, and then what happens? Nothing. Year after year went by. Finally, after 10 long years of him having to do this 2 hours a day just to get to work, I mean, that's got to be really exhausting. His request to move was finally approved, and he was allowed to move to the other side of the city. 10 years. Because you're basically at the whim of these bureaucrats who run everything. And right here it discusses that, hey, in a free capitalist society or a free enterprise society, if you lived in an apartment, you wanted to move to the other town, it's a much simpler thing to do. You don't need to ask for anybody's permission, much less some bureaucrat that really has no incentive to really help you out. If he feels like helping you, he can help you. If he's not feeling it, he can deep six your request. He can sit on it. He can sleep on it. He can, it's at his whim. You really don't have any recourse if these people do something to you that you don't like, or if they're stalling on your request, or you don't have any recourse. There's no way you can complain, or you have no power to get somebody to act on your benefit. So the author's summary is that, which makes total sense if you really stop and think about it. And the bottom line is that the less money you have, the less freedom you have. And he speaks about how his friend in Sweden could only keep 25 to 30% of his money. So let's think about this. You do your work. You earn $1, but you only get to keep 25 to 30 cents out of your dollar. Where is the justice in that? I'm not even going to talk about the legitimacy of taxes and how and what gives the government the right to have a interest in your property, because your labor is your property. You did the work. You went out and you did the work. You're the one set whatever job you do. You're the one that actually does the work. So the question becomes, how is it that the government, any government, this transcends whether it's a capitalist government, socialist government, or anything, where does any body, any person, any organization, whether you call it a government or the mob or anybody or government or the IRS or you name it, where do they get the right to be able to force you to pay them? Not for services rendered, but just because. Because if they were actually rendering service to you on a voluntary basis, then you have the ability to either accept what they're offering or to reject it. But where does anybody get the right to tell you that you have to pay them? I want you to really think about that. Where do they have the right to come and tell you that think about it. If anybody could do that and say, well, you owe me such and such money because I served you, and you don't have an ability or an opportunity to say, no thanks, I don't want that. Whatever you offering, I'm not interested. But they say, no, you not, I don't care whether or not you're interested. You're gonna pay me. You're gonna pay. Or I'm gonna arrest you, throw you in jail, take your stuff. You pay up or else. Well, what does that sound like? Does that sound like familiar to or related to an extortion type of racket? Where the mafia comes to your business and they say, hey, you got to pay us for protection. Is that protection from what? Protection from me tearing up your stuff, or from me killing you, or hurting you, or kidnapping your family, or breaking your or burning your business down. I know it's a little aside, but it's pretty much related to this, because there's a fundamental, underwriting principle here of freedom, you could call it. Freedom to, freedom to contract, freedom of association. I mean, it's voluntary contracts versus coercion, no matter what you call it. If people are telling you this is a deal you can't refuse, I got that from The Godfather, in case you didn't catch up or pick up on that. The Godfather movie with the mafia, where they shake people down. If it's a deal you can't refuse, that sounds like extortion to me. I don't care how you paint it, how you color it, how you talk about, society needs this and you get this benefit and all this kind of stuff. But the bottom line is it's extortion. So looking here down here in his friends in the Soviet bloc country, they would get food stamps, clothing ration stamps. They lived in government housing, and he could not own a car. I guess they decided he couldn't have a car, which means that this man, he had to rely on state-run transportation to get to and from work. He had no freedom to change his place of work or his housing, because remember, in a socialist country, the bureaucrats, the government determines everything. They control everything that goes on your life pretty much. So, and I guess even worse, what happens is that the food and the clothing stamps are only good at state-run stores, where the state decides what goods are to be stocked, produced, and exchanged for stamps. So you don't get the benefit of innovative people who may be, or creative people, or enterprising entrepreneurs that create amazing products. A lot of amazing products that you may be interested, that may or may not be stocked at the government store. But you're not free to choose those things, because the government has chosen not to provide them for whatever reason. So this situation basically makes these people effective slaves of the state, whether you call them comrade or citizen or whatever you want to call them. You're basically a slave. If you don't have the freedom to buy what you want or to do what you want, as long as you don't infringe on somebody else's rights, as long as you're not out there injuring other people, then what is wrong with you having the right to buy what you want, to do what you want, live where you want, earn as much as you want, to find somebody that will pay you what you feel is closer to fair than what a government bureaucrat may decide where you need to work, or where you need to live, or what products you need to buy, or what products you can't buy. So what he came to learn is that if you live in a socialist or communist controlled country, you are only allowed to keep a small percentage of your income. And what happens is, as your income declines, so do your choices of how and where you live your life. And that when you have no money, you become a slave to whoever gives you food, clothing, shelter, jobs, you name it. Because if you don't, then they can take away what you may need to live. So what you end up finding out is that the more money we give to the federal government or whatever centralized government, the less money you're going to have for yourself, and the less freedom you're going to have to choose what you want to do. Because most of what you want to do, regardless of whether it's a socialist economy or a capitalist economy, it all boils down to what you can pay for. So when you don't have any money because the government has spent taking all of your money, and they spend it on what they want. They don't spend it on what you want, and then they decide for you what you get to have. And if you think they're going to decide what's best for you and based on your interest, no, they're going to decide based on their interest. And if you really think about it, they don't really care that much about you, because one of the principles we discussed before about human nature is that each one of us cares more about ourselves than we care about others. You just can't. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying people don't care at all, but you don't really have the ability or the power to greatly affect or run somebody else's life, because running your own life takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of thought. It takes a lot of planning. It takes a lot of energy, time and energy. And you just don't have enough time to run your whole life and then run in somebody else's life with the same type of dedication. It's just not possible. It's impossible. So keep this stuff in your mind when you really stop to think and reflect and try to understand socialism and communism in relationship to capitalism. You really need to stop and think about that, because if we let these people, turn the United States into a socialist country, these are some of the things, just a scratching of the surface of some of the changes that are going to take place in your life. And you have to really stop and think and say, do I really want my life to change like this? Where I'm going to let strangers make all the critical decisions about my life? Stop and think about that. Now, I want to thank you for joining. And if you find this interesting, go ahead and subscribe, hit the bell, so that you can get access to the next episode, where we're going to continue to go on a deep analysis of socialism in relationship to capitalism, and hopefully get you to understand it better so that you can make an informed and intelligent decision about something that can greatly affect the quality of your life. So thanks a lot, and we'll talk again.